Joining me now is Senator Marco Rubio, acting Senate Intel Committee Chair. Senator, I think you say that these latest revelations of China's espionage, well, it's all just the tip of the iceberg. So what should we be looking for down the road?
Well, first, awareness. People need to. We've been talking about this for a long time. I remember 4 years ago when I started going after the Confucius Institutes. We now have none left in Florida. We got a lot of pushback because universities would say, "Oh, this is just a group that teaches Chinese language," or these are just people that sponsor trips. And when you explain to people that the Chinese they're the most holistic, whole of society threat this country's ever faced in terms of espionage. I mean, they will try to create relationships with a small town mayor who they think may one day grow up to be a governor, senator, a U.S. member of Congress. They will cultivate business relationships. They use business people. They take them to China. They let them make some money, and then they unleash them back in the U.S. and use them as lobbyists here in this country for their interests and against our national interests. They're in academia. You talked about students, especially at the graduate level. A lot of these students that are spying don't consider themselves spies. They're here. They're serving their country. Many are even linked to the military. They're researchers. They steal secrets and take it back. And then you've got American researchers who have openly just sold their research and oftentimes leaving to China with it, other times just selling it to them. And in many cases, it wasn't illegal or wasn't prosecuted. This is a big challenge. We have a lot of work ahead of us.
And Senator John Ratcliffe, Director of National Intelligence, today is quoted as issuing concerns about what might be happening with election meddling coming from China. We heard about Russian election meddling for years, but now the concerns are fueled by fresh intelligence of what China's leaders either did or plan to do to keep Trump from being reelected. Some analysts say that the new intelligence will show that China's effort to influence the U.S. election was far more extensive than previously supported. Now, Senator, has your committee, to the extent you can tell us, seen anything to back this up?
Well, let me just say, months ago, we started saying the fact that China wanted to or had intentions to at least be in a position to interfere in elections. And I mean by that everything from putting out narratives to divide us against each other. We also know that they had people out there sort of trying to work to inject things in the public discourse or potentially be in a position to do it. Now, obviously, like you said, I'm not in a position to talk about all of it. Suffice it to say that the Chinese are capable of doing anything any other country in the world can do. And I would argue that in some cases, they have the ability to do far more. The Russians are proficient at cyber warfare, they're proficient at hacking, and they're proficient at information and propaganda. But the Chinese, they can do all of that. Plus, they actually have reporters. They actually have people in the media and in academia and in think tanks that will further their narrative, that will further the Chinese narrative because they're funded by them, because they've been, co-opted from years of travel to China, you name it. And so I think that their capabilities are greater than any other country in the world of messing around with us, not just in our elections, but in everything.
Senator, other news tonight, quite significant, that hackers reportedly, again, I always take this with a grain of salt, but tied to Russia, or going back to Russia, attacked the National Nuclear Security Administration as well as Microsoft in 3 states. Do we know for sure it was Russia, number one? Eric Swalwell's tweeting about it. We'll put it up on the screen. Americans have heard this before, so they might be a little bit skeptical. But Swalwell's saying, while Republicans are losing their minds on Trump Island, the U.S. government is being hacked. Anyone want to tell the president, maybe, I don't know, protect our country and our businesses affected? This is from a guy who was compromised by a Chinese madam spy.
Yeah, and by the way, the New York Times barely covered it. The evening news on most of the networks barely covered it. I mean, just another example of how every single day the national media, by and large, for the most part, will further narratives that generate headlines that are bad for Republicans and sort of figure out a way not to cover the ones that are bad for the Democrats. But let me just say this, what we know so far, and it's publicly available, a company named Solar Wind, they're a Orion plugin, private company, provides a lot of security, online security to the private sector, a lot of agencies of government, including at the state and local level. And that was the method by which they got into these systems. I still think that even as I speak to you now, we are learning more every single day about the scope of this intrusion. It is massive. It is still, I would argue, probably persistent. It is still ongoing. It probably is unprecedented. You saw the bulletin tonight that went out. It's a grave risk to federal, to state, to local governments, to critical infrastructure, to the private sector. And as far as attribution, when you attribute it to somebody, you got to know it for sure, because it's a very, this is, almost, I would argue,
an act of
the
war,
equivalent
almost.
of an act of war, absolutely. But let me just say, it was a patient effort. It was sophisticated. It was well-funded and well-resourced. And that indicates it was a nation state. These wasn't two guys in a basement in North Korea somewhere looking to steal some cryptocurrency. Yep. This is a very serious intrusion, and we're learning a lot more about it. And we need to learn a lot more about it, and we need to take action.